Hello and welcome to another in our series of teaching videos. These are short, snappy little videos that just highlight some important issues, some topical issues for the tenanted sector of agriculture, and it forms part of our wider video library, which you can get on our YouTube channel. And you can see there information about all sorts of topics, either in this teaching format or some of our wider webinars where we look at some subjects in a lot more detail. And today we're going to be looking at the issue of understanding joint tenancies. And in a moment, I'll be introducing you to one of our expert rural surveyor advisors, Adriana Vaux, who will be leading us through that topic. We are absolutely delighted to be supported by Oxbury Bank, who are sponsoring our teaching and webinar program for 2023. Oxbury Bank were formed in 2021, and they were founded by bankers, farmers, and technologists, and they are the only bank which is 100% dedicated to serving farmers, food producers, and the rural economy. So I'm really delighted they are on board with us. So, as I say, today we're looking at joint tenancies. We are recording this at the beginning of 2023, so anything that we say is relevant at that point, and if you need further information, then do contact us afterwards. But I'm going to introduce you now to Adriana Vaux, who's, as I said, one of our specialist rural surveyor advisors, and she's going to take us through a few points to consider on the issue of understanding joint tenancies. So welcome, Adriana, the floor is yours.
Hello. Firstly, I'm going to talk about what joint tenancies actually are. Well, joint tenancies are tenancies where the tenant is more than one person. So multiple people can be joint tenants. It's quite normal for a tenancy to be in the name of just one tenant, but with joint tenancies, it allows the ability for multiple people to become tenants, such as family members. So for example, two brothers could be tenants. And any type of tenancy can have joint tenants, whether it's a farm business tenancy, an agricultural holdings act, or even a commercial or residential tenancy. Secondly, how joint tenancies come about? Well, there are a couple of ways that this can happen. Firstly, this can happen by during negotiations for a tenancy. It can be agreed with the landlord on the onset that two tenants or more than two tenants will be the joint tenants, and then the tenancy goes on to be written up in the name of those multiple tenants. Secondly, a sole tenant can be currently on a tenancy, and a deed of assignment can happen in order to get the joint tenants that they wish to be on the tenancy. Now, it should be noted that only in exceptional circumstances can this process take place without the prior written consent from the landlord. And it also should be noted that only a deed of assignment can be drawn up by a solicitor only. Then there are a few advantages of having a joint tenancy, predominantly for those who have an Agricultural Holdings Act 1986 tenancy. There is a huge benefit for having a joint tenancy because it provides both security and longevity for the tenants and their families and the families involved, because it means that the tenancy will remain in place until the last remaining tenant passes away. Another advantage is that the liability of all the clauses is split between all of the joint tenants. Therefore, this means that, for example, if you have to adhere to repairing clauses, this can be spread amongst a greater number of people and therefore making the financial costs spread more evenly. There are, however, several pitfalls to a joint tenancy, and this can happen in family situation where a breakdown happens between the joint tenants, and this results in one individual wanting to leave and one remaining, and that person who is so desperate to remain becomes quite vulnerable, because it means that the person who has left could potentially serve a notice to quit, which then ends the entire tenancy for all parties involved, which would have catastrophic consequences for that tenant who wishes to remain. A notice to quit cannot be retracted, so it's really important that this never happens. And secondly, if there is a breakdown and one person wants to leave, unless it is agreed with the landlord that one person can just walk away and be relieved of his tenancy duties, then that person is still jointly liable, no matter if he just leaves and lives halfway across the world. So that is something that you need to be aware of. There's also an issue with statutory succession and joint tenants, which can create a big issue for those wanting to succeed. And then there's the issue of removing a joint tenant. There is only one safe method, and that is that you have to contact the landlord and get the prior written consent and approval from the landlord for that one tenant to leave. Because, as I said before, a tenant cannot just up and go. Even if it is halfway across the world, they will still be legally bound to that tenancy agreement and have full responsibility and liability for all of the clauses and the financial costs involved. And if there is a breakdown in communication between the joint tenants, and that's going to cause a real issue for the remaining tenant, who may need that other tenant to be on board in, for example, serving notices or making decisions about the holding.
Thanks, Adriana, for that brief overview. Lots of things to think about there in terms of joint tenancies, both from an advantage and disadvantage in some circumstances that need to be thought through. You talked about the big issue with succession there. I think you're probably alluding to the fact that if there's joint tenants and they are siblings, let's say, and one of those siblings has a son or daughter who's involved in the farming business, hoping to succeed to the tenancy, and if it's their parent who dies, so it's the sibling with the son or daughter who dies in that instance, what happens then in relation to succession for that individual who's hoping to take on the lease?
Yes, this is a real problem because difficulties do arise when a child of one of the tenant wishes to succeed, because if they're a child of a joint tenant and their parent is the older sibling, it is quite normal, sadly, for an older child to pass away before their younger child. And if that happens in this situation, the child of that deceased older tenant is then not able to succeed from their aunt or uncle, which sadly leaves them in a position where they are unable to carry on with the tenancy, so they have no succession rights.
Okay, so it might be something to think about in terms of a tenancy succession on retirement rather than waiting for death, for example. Another question that often gets raised by members is around serving notices. So other than the issues around notices to quit that you've highlighted, is there anything else that we should be watching out for in terms of how formal notices need to be served on the landlord when there's a joint tenancy or when receiving notices from a landlord?
Yes, it's very important in order for a valid formal notice to be served, either from the landlord or the tenant, that they are served from or to all of the joint tenants. For example, a rent review notice. And it's really important that if you do receive such a notice or you want to send a notice, contact us and we can check its validity or advise you on how best to serve the notice properly and validly.
Okay, thanks, Adriana. I think we'll leave it there for now. Obviously, there may be more questions that people have about their position on joint tenancies or maybe creating a joint tenancy. Anybody that has any questions on that can become a member of the TFA. It's relatively inexpensive at the moment. It's only £249 per year to be a member, and you get access to dedicated advice, information and support from expert surveyors like Adriana, who can lead you through that. So I hope you've enjoyed that session. As I say, it's part of a video library of information that you can get from our YouTube channel, and you can get access to our wider program of webinars and these teach-ins as well. Many thanks again to Oxbury for their generous sponsorship of this series of teach-ins and webinars, and look out for some further webinars that we'll be running. If you're watching this at the beginning of 2023, then in February we have a webinar with Janet Hughes, who's the Program Director for Future Farming within DEFRA, who will be taking us through some of the announcements that we've just had in respect of the Sustainable Farming Incentive and Countryside Stewardship. And then in March we'll be looking at what scheme is right for you, what aspect of Countryside Stewardship or Sustainable Farming Incentive should you be thinking about in terms of that. But for now, thanks very much for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you soon.